Hey, welcome to Carswell's Customs. We finally got our Factory 5 Mark IV delivered and set up in our garage. Now, there are a couple items back ordered, so as we go through the build we'll have to probably maneuver around those and jump back and forth. But I ordered the basic kit, so I use a donor car along with the parts that Factory 5 sent. And judging from the amount of items that are back ordered, I think it's a pretty good idea that I did have a component card to pull parts from. Let's take a quick look here at the two showstoppers. Okay, here's the MK4 chassis as it's delivered. Well, I pulled the body off, but other than that, we're going to pull the body panels off first, mark them, rivet them, and attach them to the structure. Here's the 97 Cobra that you'd seen in an earlier video. Again, 43,000 miles, T45 5-speed, and dual overhead cam 4.6. So that ought to get her done. One thing I want to show real quick, here's the body, the fiberglass body that was delivered with the kit. And you can see that you had better have a buddy who's done fiberglass work, because these seams on here are monstrous, especially in the front here. You can see how tall that is, and then down here it's wild. So I mean, we're gonna need like Godzilla with a grinder to come here and help us out. So anyway, just be aware of that when you do decide to get your own kit. Yeah, have a buddy who does fiberglass. Okay, back to the other side. Okay, so now we moved on to pulling the aluminum panels off of the chassis itself. And so as I'm moving through this project and I'm pulling these aluminum panels off, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I'm going to have a problem putting this all back together correctly unless I do some sort of marking, identifying how this stuff works and goes together. So I've kind of went outside the box on what I'm supposed to be doing. So as I'm pulling these metal panels off, the first thing I'm doing is marking them. I was using the numbering system that Factory 5 provided, but that didn't make any damn sense. So just going to go ahead and start writing things just as I'm taking them off. And so you can also see I've identified these P to P. So that's a panel to panel rivet spacing that I'm going to have to use. And then I have PF somewhere. Here's a good one. PF, which is panel to frame plus panel to panel. Okay? The threes were a numbering system that I worked out, and I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. Instead of numbering each panel, I'm just slowly going to reconstruct the box, the foot box here, or this aluminum structure outside of the Factory 5. What I'll do is I'll continue with this driver's side foot box, and then I'll take this bottom floor panel, which comes up to here as well, right? And I'll assemble that outside of the car, make all the drilling points, and then reassemble that piece, that module, back inside the car. Therefore, once that's tied together, I can tie this panel and this rear whatever panel, and then the front whatever panel, and then the top front whatever panel. We can get those things all riveted as modules, and hopefully that's a good idea. Alright, let's talk about a couple things I learned riveting these panels on the front of the chassis here. These rivets have a 3-inch spacing, and so this rivet here and then this rivet here was made by the factory when they used the little sheet metal screws and attached this to the frame when they first started. So I took a micrometer because I don't have the rivet spacing tool. That must be back ordered too. Took my micrometer and made 3-inch marks as we go down here. And then you have to be kind of careful in here and in here where you make your marks. And that's because, as you can see on the flip side, you don't want to put a rivet into like these welds. Okay? So what I did was, on the panel, you can kind of tell where those two bars are going to come together and be welded. Alright, and so I went in a little bit and then made the 3-inch spacing in between here, which kept me clear of the welds and any other items that are going to get in trouble. So, and another thing, once we get down here, you can see that with this bracket in the way, if you go ahead and just run 3-inch spacing on these rivets, and you run another one in here, there's no way to get your drill in there, or I'm sorry, the rivet gun in there to make that final rivet. So while I had the panel up against the frame itself, there's a ton of marks on here, but you can see this little mark here, and this little mark here, and then one here, these little guys. So why I did that was I marked where I would think that the rivet should go, and it kept me away from all the structure here and the welds, so my rivets didn't bang into the welds and make that either weaker or not being able to get the rivet in, because drilling through welds is a good way to bust my bits up. So okay, so this is not exactly gripping video, but we're going to be running a lot of rivets into the chassis and through these aluminum panels, so we'll go ahead and go over it once. If you already know how to do this or whatever, skip to the next chapter. But so like I said, I went ahead and just set my micrometer to 3-inch distance. Make a little mark. 3-inch. 3-inch. Then inside here, like I said before, between these where the welds occur, put some there, and then we've got a rivet hole right up here already, so I'll come away from that, estimate there, but see, this gets a little too close to the rivet area, so I'll just back those two back. And then X that one out. So then that's going to be my drill spots. I'll go over here too. But I want to make sure that there's no clearance issues like we talked about before. So let me go grab this and we'll see what we got. So just like on the passenger side panel, there is a bracket or mount that comes out this far into the panel. And so my template's on the other side here. So I'm just going to take my finger, put a little dot there, and then that will be the start of our 3-inch spacing again. Got a bent flange here, so I'm just going to push that off the end of the table and go ahead and start running the drill and putting these guys together. Buy some extra bits, 1/8 bits. I like the cobalt steel, and this is the last 1/8 bit that I have. So alright, so usually the top side's not too jammed up after you run a drill bit through, but the back side here usually has some boogers hanging on, so we'll go ahead and clean those up real quick. Sometimes you can get away with it with the sharp chisel, just kind of giving them a little love, but I like reaming tools too. That works really good and quick. But don't go weakening the aluminum. give her a quick jam. Only are the ones that need it. And that way the aluminum panel and the rivets will be as close to each other as possible. You won't have some kind of hanger in there preventing the rivet from compressing the aluminum panel to the steel chassis. Alright, we'll go put her on after we wipe it off. So I'm going to wipe it with acetone. So when I apply the silicone and the silicone will have a good sticking location. There won't be any contamination. And I'll do the same on the chassis. Alright, have some acetone on here, so I'm going to go ahead and just give her a wipe down. Now I'll put the silicone on. Ooh, that's a big booger. Let's spread that off. Yuck. Okay. Keep her rattling, keep her from rattling. Okay, there we go. Okay, that'll stick her down for a second so we can run our drill in through the chassis, through the aluminum holes that we've already made. So, let's go ahead and start here in the middle. Okay. We'll get this one stuck down, then we'll move down here. That way it'll at least appear organized. You'll want an air-powered or battery-powered rivet driver. You're going to have forearms like Popeye, which is cool too, I guess. Okay. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and continue drilling the holes through the aluminum template we've got here into the chassis and keep on running rivets. Alright, so this is the front suspension assembly in the Factory 5 manual for the Mark IV. We're going to go ahead and identify and show all the parts in real life here with the bolts and everything, so there's no question on what we're doing. So Okay, here's the whole assembly. So we've got the lower control arm, we've got the spring and the rubber insulators. Okay, we've got the strut, brake disc, and brake caliper. All right, so we'll just go through them and talk about what we got to do to pull them off. So we'll roll this forward a little bit, and you can see that the brake caliper is held onto the spindle itself by these two bolts here. All right, so what we'll do is the first piece we'll do when we're going to take all this stuff off is we're going to pull the brake caliper off. And obviously you're doing this with a wrench, but 2 bolts, and then you slide the caliper right off. Put the caliper over here. Then what we have next is the brake disc. So once the caliper's off, the brake disc just floats and comes right off. So that takes us down to the knuckle itself, and inside here is the wheel bearing. Okay. Now part of the steering is this tie rod. This is what pushes steers the car left and right when you use the steering wheel. So that'll have to be taken off as well. We pull that off, and sometimes these are stuck on pretty good, so you'll need to find a buddy that's got a pickle fork that can come in there and wedge that out. Okay, so that's done. Keep coming around here. You'll also have, this is the lower ball joint. You'll have to spin this bolt off as well, or this nut off as well. Okay, and by this point, obviously, this spring here is still under tension and under compression. And so you'll have to get your spring compressor on this and compress this spring so that way nothing weird happens when you start pulling off these parts that have high tension on them. Okay? So once we pull this nut off, usually the ball joint's jammed in here pretty good as well. So this is where you'll need the pickle fork again. Hammer it in with your hammer, and that will break that piece loose. Okay. So now that you've got this off, we can go ahead and pull these out. These hold the knuckle itself to the strut. And once those come out, you can get your front knuckle off the car. And so this will still be in the car itself. So once you get the spring compressor on this and get your spring compressed enough, this should be able to pull right out. And then all you're left with is this lower control arm with these 2 bolts, large bolts, that tie the lower control arm to the chassis of the car itself. So we knock these off. And then this whole lower control arm comes out. And then you can start cleaning it. So I've used mineral spirits and started getting some of the garbage off here right now. I'll hit it again with mineral spirits and then probably move to a power washer, then acetone, and then paint it. And I'm going to use black brake caliper paint for all the suspension stuff because it's highly durable and it will withstand high temperatures. So there we go. So there's our donor car stuff, and that will go onto the factory 5 after it's cleaned up a little bit. You'll notice the theatrical way of getting the spring out of the car. That's why you use a spring compressor, because if you bang those things out without having a spring compressor or a jack under the A-arm, those springs will fly out. So that was just kind of a demonstration on why you should be using a spring compressor. Because when I'm helping people out, a lot of times they're like, well, do you really need one? Yeah, you do, because those things will launch. So there's a good idea of how much pressure is actually underneath it, and that is a safety video to show you what not to do. So do not do what I just did. That was specifically for an example to show spring pressure shooting out of the bottom of a car. So anyway, awesome. I'll catch back with you when I got something good to say. Alright, so we got the parts taken off, and now since we have the donor kit, we're gonna clean them. So we got the lower control arm here, the spindle, and the brake caliper. So best thing to do that I found, instead of buying a parts washer, is to just take the parts and put them right in to a big bin. Now, I like to use mineral spirits, and this is probably the best deal that I can find. You get this at Lowe's because it's 100% mineral spirits. That's like $43.50 for that 5 gallons, and that's the best deal I've found so far on getting mineral spirits. So I'll go ahead and pour some in. One of these brushes made for a parts washer. These things are really the right tool for the job. And so I'll just go around over here, start scrubbing stuff, get all the mineral spirits on everything. Just kind of let it sit for a little while, and then we can get started on something else. So let's go on over to parts that have already been washed. Again, here's the caliper, and that cleaned up really nice. The steering knuckle or spindle and the lower control arm. So these ball joints are going to have to be pulled out. So I've got a ball joint kit over here, and so that's going to be one of the tasks we're going to go ahead and solve. But before we get to that, real quick, I wanted to run over the sockets that you're going to need to take this front suspension off. A regular socket set would be fine, but some of these bolts are on really hard, so I would recommend a 1/2-inch drive impact sockets. So you're going to need a 24 millimeter for these big guys, a 21 for the other end, right? And this 24 again goes to the ball joint, and then 15 millimeter for the caliper bolts, and then the stabilizer, the anti-sway bar bushing. So that's kind of a roundabout of what you're going to need in tools and cleaning materials. So I'm going to go ahead and get the ball joint press set up, and then we'll press that out, and I'll show all that in the next piece. Okay, so let's get some ball joints changed out here. You'll see that this is the new AC Delco ball joint, and the way that it's oriented, it is pressed in from the bottom because it's got this big shelf here on the bottom here. So what we got to do is we're going to have to push this old ball joint out through the A-arm, and we're going to do that with our ball joint press here. So into the bottom here, and you'll see that the screw is going to put pressure on this like collar and sleeve and drag this arm down and pop this ball joint out. Alright, so sometimes you got to get a little hammering out, and so what I've done is I've taken that collar and I've placed it around where the ball joint is, and I'm going to put it right on the cement, kind of give it a raise. there it is. Okay, so after we got the old ball joint out, we got the new one here ready to go. Going to reorient all of the tools with the ball joint press to press it in. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and not use the impact. We're going to go ahead and use the like a breaker bar, a ratcheting breaker bar, because I want to make sure that this thing seats in there level. And so we're just going to start adding some pressure to it and then see where it ends up. And here we are after using the ball joint press. Okay. Ball joint is installed. So we'll go ahead and put the circ fitting or the grease fitting in there, and that'll be that. Here comes the grease fitting. Thread it right in there, and we got a 8mm ratcheting wrench, and we'll put her in. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and take this off. We don't need it, and we will not be replacing it because it doesn't use this in the kit. So yeah, so here we go. After mineral spirits, power wash, and then spot cleaning with acetone, we took the lower control arm that looked like this, and we turned it into this beaut. Right, same thing with the caliper. Looking wild. And now I've got the stealth look. Alright, the front spindle. And even with the banged up edges, it still looks pretty sharp. So again, a little bit of work, a little bit of cleaners, and we got ourselves some good looking parts here that have been reclaimed from the donor Mustang. One thing about these lower control arms, sometimes they can be a real pain to get out. These big bolts here, back by the bushings, and then the ball joint's kind of a pain too. These stock lower control arms, they're available with brand new ball joints in it. So if you don't really feel like buying heavy duty, 24mm sockets and impacts and all that kind of nonsense, you could get away with going to, Napa or, AutoZone and grabbing one of these lower control arms that already have the bushings and ball joint in there. So that should relieve kind of some stress if you don't have a shop with that kind of heavy duty stuff sitting around. So, all right, cool. We're moving on. All right, so we're going to go ahead and modify or talk about the modification of the front lower control arms. As you can see in the assembly manual, there's a 1/2-inch hole that gets drilled into it, and you notch this out for the lower, for the coilover shock, the lower eyelet, if you will. So, but there's not much information on where this bolt with this mount is. So let's go ahead and pull that off the rear end, and I'll show you where that's located and how you get it off. Okay, so the front shock mount that we just discussed is actually found on the rear end. So when we pull the rear shock out, there is a shock mount there that's going to be transferred to the front. So as you look underneath here, there's the nut that's going to hold this shock mount on, and we'll pull this nut off and pull this whole assembly off. Then we'll machine the front lower A-arm. Now to mount the shocks on the back of this, there is another bracket that goes on, so this piece isn't used anymore on the back of the car. So we'll pull that off, and then we'll catch back up with you. Okay, so here's the lower control arm after we've drilled it out. And so what happens is we measure down, at least what we've gotten figured out here today,
is you'll take the from the top of this lower control arm, the highest point here, and then you come down right to the middle. It's about 0.90 on the micrometer in inches, and you'll go ahead and use your punch, and then we ran a 1/8 bit first through it, and then I didn't have a 1/2 inch, but we have I forgot, so hang tight 1 second. It is a 31/60, so almost a 1/2 inch. So after we punched a hole and did that, then we checked how this thing sat, and the pictures in the book don't really tell us if this tang goes up or down or left or right or whatever, so we're just going to assume it sits here. The mount itself is centered in the hole. We may have to clearance this out for the coilover shock when it ever arrives. It's back ordered right now, so we're just kind of moving along. You see the back side. Okay. And so, from what I can gather through the instruction manual, that's what we're looking for on creating the front lower control arm shock mount using a donor car. And this did, just to recap, this came from the back. It's the rear shock mount off of the rear axle. So anyway, let's jump over real quick. We'll do a measurement and get the next hole drilled. So again, we'll go over here, try to find the flat spot of the upper control arm. All right. Okay, there's our push punch, and I think it's easier if you flip this guy right over and then come at it right next to the ball joint. Maybe next time we'll wait to put the ball joint in and do this machining first, but you know, going on what we've got, we've just done the best we could. So a quick observation when drilling the hole into the lower control arm. Up here is the upper shock mount, and so we drilled our lower control arm and installed the lower shock mount. So if we look at this here, if we try to line the two up, this situation here is pretty good. I mean, the upper shock mount and the lower shock mount are in line, and so I think that once we install the coilover shock, the shock will be happy. But on the other side, it didn't. I didn't drill the hole far enough towards the front of the car, and I'll show you that. Okay, here's the driver's side, and you can notice the upper control or the upper shock mount and the lower shock mount. They're at a different orientation. So while I'm not super concerned, because the shock should have misalignment spacers and be able to articulate the lower versus the upper, it doesn't look right, and I don't think it's right. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to get a better orientation or scribe marks on your lower control arm so you don't run into this problem. Alright, you can see the hole here that we drilled. And as I pitch over a little bit here, you can see from the center line of this lower A-arm, like if you take an imaginary line and draw it from the center line through this hole, you pretty much run into the ball joint. I noticed on the other side that if you took an imaginary line and drew it from the center line of that hole to the outside of the ball joint, it lines up much better. So case in point, we'd probably move, if we could, this hole over about a half an inch, and that would put us, again, as we draw the cigar container center line, it puts us on the outside or the front side of the ball joint. Okay, I hope that helps out. It's not quite scientific, but we can draw a conclusion there that we definitely need to stay on the front side of the ball joint if you're going to draw a line from the center line of the hole. So, hope that helps.
Okay, so we're going to be working on the upper A-arm. The ball joint here is a big square-headed type, and what we've done is just open the vise up, punched it in, and gave it a quick tighten all the way down with blue Loctite on there. Okay, so we'll take this and these two shoulder bolts. I've got the shoulder up here, and it's a fine thread bolt with metal lock nut. So we're going to go ahead and attach the upper A-arm to the chassis with the metal lock nuts and with everything assembled. So, okay, so this upper A-arm is going to go right at this chassis mounting point on top, and I've got two wrenches here. One's a 3/4 and one's a 19 millimeter. They're both gear wrenches. So okay, and so lock nuts. We'll go ahead and just thread those on through the back here and start tightening them down. Alright, so the next step is we're going to use the stock lower control arm bolts into the Factory 5 chassis using the stock lower control arms. And so as we tap this in, we'll notice that the bolt here is running into the chassis or the frame. So to get this thing correct, we're going to knock about 1/16 or 1/8 off of this bolt, this rear lower control arm bolt off the tip, so that way you can see there is a gap here between the bolt and the mount itself. So plan for grinding about a 1/8 or 1/16, probably go with an 1/8 of an inch off of these stock lower control arm bolts to clearance, to make clearance for the stock chassis. So we're going to go ahead and do that and then give a quick shot after we're done. Yeah, we'll get to that. So you can see we clearance the bolt here. So we'll pound this in just enough so we can still get the nut on. We got our 21 millimeter wrench here, and this is 24 or 13/16 will also work. Sorry, 15/16. Point of the matter is, you can see in there we've got plenty of clearance now from this bolt to the chassis. So we'll go ahead and tighten this one up, and we'll tighten the other side up, and we'll get back with you with something interesting. Alright, so here's the front suspension, loosely assembled. We can't finish assembly due to the fact that we don't have the coilover shocks. And so we have everything mocked up and ready to go. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the comments and we'll go ahead and address those. But this is where we're going to wrap it up and we're going to move on to rear suspension. Again, any question or comments, leave in the box and we'll see you next time.